Good morning, TOK students. Welcome to class number 13. Today we're going to talk about gender and identity. We're also going to have some uncomfortable talks and some videos. So, let's get started. What do you know? All right. So, y'all haven't seen one of these before, but this is a warning. This is a serious warning. Some of the stuff that we study to get you ready for college is college appropriate material. That means that it may go right up to the edge or even across sometimes the edge of what we would find in a normal high school classroom. This is college preparatory work. This presentation contains discussions of human sexuality, gender, and identity that are entirely appropriate for our studies. We can't talk about identity without talking about gender. The language used is forthright and accurate. I will, where possible, be avoiding euphemisms or wishy-washy language. That means that a respectful and mature approach is strongly advised. Um, this is a lesson where I would strongly encourage you, as awkward as it may be, to tell your parents or guardians what it is you are studying in this lesson. Let them preview the materials or view the materials with you. I can't imagine anything more uncomfortable than sitting with my own teenage children and talking to them about this subject. But as a parent, I had to do it. I don't want any parent blindsided by any work we're doing ever. I don't want them to think that they're not involved or that they're not being respected. So, again, please feel free. I can't strongly enough recommend talk to your parents about this lesson. And for those of you who are thinking, well, I just want to take a pass on this, I don't know how to tell you this. If you're not mature enough for this, you are not ready for college work. I can give you an alternate assignment to do, and you can come back to me when you're seniors and over 18. Okay, so with that out of the way, Class 13, Identity. As part of our study of identity over the next couple weeks, we're going to be talking today about identity, specifically gender identity, gender sexuality, gender expression, orientation, how all of those components of the human total make a piece of the knower. Okay, let's just dive in. One of the comments that was made to me, apparently by a couple of students, and has been talked about with several more, is that I've just been going too slow on these. And those of you who've seen me face to face, you know that slow is not something that would normally apply to my speaking. I guess just with the video interface, I want to make sure that everybody has time to get all the information they need. But we're going to kick it into high gear. Training wheels are off, and here we go. Why gender? Gender is critical. It's a critical signifier of human relationships. That means that it's one of the key ways we identify other human beings. You are much, much more likely to forget somebody's occupation, their name, their face. You're even more likely to forget someone's ethnicity than you are their gender. That's one of the reasons why when we meet someone who we can't immediately categorize into one of our mentally pre-configured gender identities, it causes a certain amount of cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the effect that you experience when you are forced to think about something you are normally able to not think about. This isn't necessarily a bad thing. The shock of the new is one of the expressions we use as knowers. But it does mean that there's an element of gender that is so fundamental we don't realize we're doing it. Doctors, especially psychologists, sociologists, psychiatrists, have long understood that gender is a nuanced subject. There are many, many shades of meaning. There are fine, differentiated, granular details when it comes to talking about this subject. Our society has always had, especially in Western society, particularly in the Protestant-dominated Christian ethos of modern American culture, there has been a strong dichotomy, a division into two. Uh, Male and female genders, male and female gender roles, heterosexual orientations. All of these things were so hard coded into our society that modern society is really playing catch up. We're just starting to acknowledge that it's not that things have changed, it's that we're finally admitting the world is far more complicated than we used to admit. Before we get into the details, we need to define some terms. We're going to be talking about sex, gender, gender identity. You may also hear gender expression or sexual orientation thrown out here. There are a lot of different terms. Most of the material in this section is based on a website called All About Sex, Gender, and Gender Identity from Planned Parenthood. I'll provide a link in your assignment email. Now, some of you may have immediately had a triggering moment when I said the words Planned Parenthood. And this is something that's really important to understand for our studies. The reason Planned Parenthood is such a hot button issue or topic for many people in our culture is that in some areas, actually most areas of the United States, they are among the largest or indeed the only provider of abortion services. However, that's a relatively small part of what Planned Parenthood does. The majority mission of Planned Parenthood is, like it says in the name, Planned Parenthood. It's family planning, contraception, health services, especially women's health and reproductive services, but also services relating to gender and gender identity and sexuality for men, women, teens. It is a full service clearinghouse of information. I strongly advise you, regardless of your views on the right to life or pro choice issues, don't discount the things they have to say about gender and identity. They've done a lovely job of collecting some of the best research available, and they represent the scientific consensus of our time. You may disagree with their politics, but I would find it hard to disagree with most of the information they provide in terms of where modern psychiatry, sociology, and medicine intersect on the ideas of sex, gender, and gender identity. Now, having said that, what do all these terms mean? Well, sex is a label that's usually first given by a doctor based on the genes, hormones, visible body parts like genitalia that you are born with. It goes on your birth certificate and describes your body as female or male. Some people's sex doesn't fit into male or female. These people are called intersex, or sometimes atypical expression, which simply means way to one end or the other end of a bell curve of typical gender or sexual expressions. Gender is a societal norm that's based on how society thinks we should look and act based on our sexual assignment, our gender at birth, if you will. Each culture has beliefs and informal or even formal rules about how people should behave based on their gender. For example, many cultures expect and encourage men to be more aggressive than women. Some cultures have differing codes of dress or worship for men and women. Gender is about your overall persona. Gender identity is how you feel inside, how you see your own gender. And how you express gender expression, how you express your gender through clothing, behavior, appearance. It's a feeling that begins early in life. And it really does begin early. Now, some people may say, well, my uncle didn't know he was gay until he was 30. Socialization, the expectation of who you're supposed to be, can be an incredibly powerful influence. And many people take a long time to figure out who they really are. Likewise, some people go through a questioning or exploratory exploratory time, and all they do is confirm that their gender identity matches their gender expression and their assigned sex. Uh, they are a man who, through exploration and open minded thinking, has determined that he's a man, and so on. Um, you'll also see references to sexual orientation. This has to do with who you are interested in sexually or romantically, and is really an entirely separate issue, or at least not directly connected issue to sex, gender, and gender identity expression. Are you with me so far? I hope so, because it only gets more complex from here. Two words, actually, they're prefixes that have come to be abbreviated and stand on their own as words. Two words that you'll often see in discussion of gender and gender identity are trans, and less commonly you'll see cis, C-I-S. What are trans and cis? Well, a trans isomer is an isomer where the functional groups appear on one side of the double bond. A cis isomer is a functional group are both on the same side of the double bond, adjacent to each other. For those of you pursuing organic chemistry, this is a big deal. It also, by the way, happens in inorganic compounds as well as diazines. I have no idea what diazines are. I had high school chemistry. In college, I had biology, astronomy, and cosmology, which I failed, but I would have passed if I had the math. So stay in school. Don't forget your math. In seriousness, as they relate to the study of gender and gender identity, let's talk about what these things mean. Most people who are assigned female at birth identify as girls and then as women. Most people who are assigned male at birth identify as boys and then as men. These people are cisgender, or cis. That means corresponding to the assigned birth gender. Some people have a gender identity that doesn't correspond to the gender assigned at birth. For example, they were born with female or female appearing genitalia, but they identify as male. Or they were identified as intersex based on their biology, but they clearly identify as male or female. These people are transgender or trans. Trans is the T in LGBTQ+. On that subject, it used to be gay in my lifetime, which you didn't talk about. Then it was lesbian and gay. Then it was lesbian, gay, bisexual. When trans was added, it was LGBT. Then queer, questioning, genderqueer, LGBTQ, then LGBTQIA, and then there are now so many acronyms as we've identified so many different locations on the spectrum that LGBTQ plus is my preferred nomenclature in class. I don't want to disrespect anybody who's farther down the alphabet list, but at the same time, at some point we run out of syllables. If you consider this to be a significant issue and you want to convince me that I'm incorrect, by all means, let's have the discussion. The last thing I want is anybody to feel left out or denigrated in our classroom. All right. Trans can also include people who do not identify with a strict male-female gender roles. These are people who view their gender as either fluid, gender fluid is the expression, people who view their gender as performative. That means that based on the situation and the social role they're filling, they modify their gender presentation either consciously or unconsciously. There are other gender identity terms and labels. Whatever you do, I'm going to ask, please do not use terms like transgendered, tranny, transvestite, he, she. Don't use non-gender pronouns like it. Those are old-fashioned, and most of them are either intentionally or unintentionally hurtful. It's always best to respect the words that people use to describe themselves, but we're going to use trans or transgender in class, trying to be a trans-friendly environment. All right. So, having just said that I want our classroom to be inclusive and friendly and appropriate, I'm now going to play a video clip which includes a joke that uses words inappropriately. But I want to give some context. This video clip is from a film called In and Out. It was a fairly mild, relatively harmless comedy about a man who's a drama teacher in a small town, conservative small town, who is engaged. He's been engaged for some time to a young lady, and one of his former students wins an Academy Award, and during the Academy Award speech casually mentions that this guy is the best drama teacher ever, and he's gay. And he outs his drama teacher. Now, the humor derives from the fact that the teacher himself was not out to himself. That it forced him to evaluate his own life. And in defending his perceived femininity, his perceived lack of traditional masculine roles, he comes to realize that in fact he is not straight, that he is gay. Spoiler for the movie that came out before you were born. But Kevin Kline, talking to Tom Selleck, the two actors in the scene, is so flustered when his parents meet him and the Hollywood reporter who has just kissed him at an intersection that he becomes flummoxed with his words. And after I complete this slide, the little clip will play, and I hope that you don't find it offensive. What does intersex mean? Intersex means you're born with biological traits that are outside a strict male-female gender binary. Whether it can be your anatomy, it can be your chromosomes, or it can be hormones, or some combination. This is not the same thing as being transgender, although many intersex individuals, having been assigned one gender role at birth, modify their gender identity and do exist in a trans continuum. Being intersex is often caused by one of many genetic or hormonal variations. And notice I said variations, not defects, not diseases. It's much more common than most people realize. For some people, it's clear they're intersex from birth, but many people don't find out they're intersex until they go through puberty, or as they age, don't go through puberty, or even later. Some people live their entire lives with the gender that they were, and gender identity that corresponding to their assigned birth gender, and then only after they're unable to have children and go through fertility counseling do they discover that they have a genetic or chromosomal variation which puts them in the intersex category. This can be a real shock, and in fact, it can be a damaging shock. Many people find it strikes to their identity, which is understandable. We've talked about how critical gender is to the concept of self, to the identity. And if somebody tells you that something you thought about yourself was wrong, that can be very disturbing. If you grew up thinking that you were Irish and Chinese, and you found out that you were actually German and Korean, well, you still have a side of the family from Northern Europe, a side of the family from the Pacific Rim, but the language, culture, the image in your head of who you are and how those components impact you can be very shocking. Now imagine that it struck at your biology, something completely outside your control, invisible to you in your life. I strongly suggest that if you think you might be intersex, or if you are intersex, talk with a good doctor, a doctor you're comfortable with. Not all doctors are up to date with the latest information on helping intersex patients. The website that I mentioned earlier, where I've got most of these definitions, can give you more information. You can also check out Interact, a network for intersex teens and young adults. A link will be included there. And most importantly, you can talk to your parents. You're not alone, nor should you ever feel that you are. Now, having done our best to keep these terms straight, oh, I said the S word, to keep all these terms moving on gaily forward, we'll now have our little clip and we'll move on. All right. We've bulldozed our way through quick definitions, just scratching the surface of gender and gender identity, and gender expression, of sexuality, of orientation, and gender presentation. Deep breath. Okay, why do we care? The simple answer is that your generation, more than any generation of Americans before you, doesn't care. You are less, statistically and collectively, you are less disturbed, less bothered by this than any group that's come before. It's just another piece of information. There are still people who have phobias, who have specific interests, who have prejudices, who have varying personal experiences. But overall, young people today find this just a fact of life. Which, yay us, my generation has done at least one thing right. We may have wrecked the environment and crashed the international banking system, put health and college completely out of your ability to afford, but at least we made you not so uptight as we are about our bodies and what people do with them. Why do we care? It's because social interaction is a key part of knowing. If we don't know ourselves and know others, then we can't really know much of anything. All right, and now we are not going to do the sex talk. No, seriously, I am not going to use this video to talk to a bunch of teenagers about sex. Not gonna. It may seem difficult to believe, as devil may care as I am, but I like teaching, and that would be trouble so far above my pay grade. So what do we do? First of all, talk to your parents. Please, seriously, if you haven't already had meaningful discussions with your parents or guardians regarding sex, gender, its role in your life, in your faith, in your time you are living under their roof, now would be a good time to awkwardly have that talk. Maybe point them at this video and say, I don't want to do this either, but Mix Cafiro said it was an assignment. It's for school. They are very much behind you completing your IB program, so who knows, maybe that'll help. I don't recommend you just talk to your friends, because although your friends are more educated and more aware of these issues, the amount of disinformation, the noise to signal ratio, is still not where we'd want it to be. You can be modern. You can use the interwebs. It's basically a series of tubes filled with cats, but occasionally you can find good information. You can also find terrible information on the internet, though, which is why I recommend you go to a trusted site like the ones I've linked, or, again, have an awkward talk with your parents. All right, so you've had time to pause the video, you've gone and spoken to your parents, you had a deep and meaningful conversation in which there was a give and take among equals. They shared their wisdom, and you expressed your curiosity and intellectual rigor for, okay, who are we kidding? You have probably not gone and spoken to your parents, but I've asked you several times. I'm not going to make you, I can't twist your arm. Instead, I'm going to go to an academic source. Again, we're going to go to Crash Course. Crash Course, we use them a lot, and it's very simple. They put a lot of information into a short, well-moderated, well-presented package. You can go back and rewind it. You can download transcripts. They often include sources for their information and citations for their statistics. And most importantly, they give you a pretty balanced and unbiased set of viewpoints on complex and controversial subjects. Crash Course Sociology is relatively new. I've been very pleased with the course so far. I'm up to about episode 30 or 35 or 40. But what we're going to look at today is Crash Course Sociology 31, which is about sex and sexuality. And I hope that it is going to give you the information you need for our class. So I hope you've watched the Crash Course video. If you haven't yet, after you get this reflection question, I'm going to strongly suggest you finish that video before class number 14. Here's the reflection. I don't want you to go to the Padlet yet. I don't want you to do any formal writing on this, but I want you to start thinking about these ideas so that they have some time to marinate, some time to soak in, and for you to come up with not just your first reaction, but your reaction after reflection. And I want you to ask yourselves, how do sexuality, orientation, gender expression impact the TOK areas of knowing? How does the male-female binary or the existence of non-binary individuals impact mathematics, the natural sciences? What about the human sciences? How is history changed by our understanding of gender and gender identity? Certainly the arts, ethics, and religious knowledge have huge impacts from gender and gender identity and a modern understanding of the biology, psychology, and sociology behind it. And of course, indigenous knowledge. Sometimes we give indigenous knowledge systems a bad rap. We tend to think of them as being primitive. I would point out that Native American groups indigenous Americans in North America, in both Canada and what is now the United States, many tribes had the idea of two-spirit, the idea of a single person who contained both a female and male aspect. It was not uncommon in the Pacific Northwest, for example, for tribes that due to war, illness, injury, or bad luck had an overabundance of males or overabundance of females, to have individuals who voluntarily assumed the gender roles and even gender identities of a different gender to balance the life of the tribe. I can't imagine anyone at Hillcrest saying, well, we don't have enough people for a boys' chess team and a girls' chess team, so we need some of you girls to be boys. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. But in some tribes, on a more life and death, life of the tribe kind of way, this was not an unreasonable request, and it was in fact an honor. There are some distinct two-tribe individuals in American history whose history was suppressed for a long time because it was viewed as barbarous or inappropriate. And now it's a point of investigation and for some groups of celebration. How do sexuality, orientation, gender expression impact the areas of knowledge? All right. I want you to have a great day. I want you to think about these things, and I look forward to talking to you all next time.